John McMullen from 97.3 ESPN.com and todayspigskin.com at JF McMullen on Twitter. Covers the Eagles. He's at practice today. Jim Schwartz had some high praise for his newest toy, Stephen Tulloch. Did you get any better indication today? John, I think Tulloch might be even talking as we speak here. Do you get any better indication on the way that Schwartz anticipates using Tulloch?
Not really. He is talking, by the way. And you're Michael Bivens, by the way, Mike.
All right, Michael Bivens. How about that, PT?
Bell bit to bow knowledge. But, I think remember, Stephen just got there today. And I think the concern, as I kind of mentioned yesterday, was seeing how he was physically because he's coming off off-season ankle surgery. So I think the Eagles are playing it the way they should, and the fact that they're trying to keep everything status quo. There's no reason to upset the apple cart, so to speak, until you realize he's ready. Then when he's ready, you can start to implement the plans. And I've said from day one, I don't think it's changed. You can tell Jim Schwartz can hardly contain himself when he speaks about Stephen Tulloch as far as how much respect he has for him. If he's physically ready to go, I think he's going to be eventually the starting middle linebacker of this team, a two-down player, and Jordan Hicks will move to the weak side. Then you have a competition on the strong side. The nickel, it'll be Hicks and either Kendricks or Bradham, and in the dime, it'll be Hicks. So Jordan still remains the only three-down linebacker, but I don't think there's any question that Jim Schwartz wants to get Stephen Tulloch on the field.
Yeah, why Tulloch didn't practice today. What about the other guys, Hicks, Kendricks? What are they saying about this?
Well, Kendricks, I think we spoke to him a little bit yesterday. I think he knows a little bit of the writing is on the wall, and he understands. Look, he's been out with a hamstring injury, and he just got back. And we've seen how many times could we say that about Michael Kendricks. I mean, you could say that same sentence basically 3 or 4 times every year. He's had a very, very difficult time staying on the field, and that continues. And I think there's a concern, even though this is obviously a new coaching staff, but Howie Roseman's been around for all of it. He understands this is a guy that's had a very difficult time staying on the field. And when he's on the field, he tends to be an underachiever, at least from a skill set standpoint, because he is tremendously athletic, has great speed for the position, but he's not the most instinctive guy in the world. And he's had trouble picking up things. And normally when you talk about a linebacker with the athleticism of Michael Kendricks, what you immediately think of, or should, is a great coverage linebacker. And he's been anything but. That's been really the biggest weakness of his game.
John McMullen's with us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3. John, getting back to Stephen Tulloch just for a minute, I know that we've talked about Jim Schwartz and how he raves about him. If you could maybe share the story that Jim told today about his Iron Man, his Cal Ripken-esque not wanting to miss practices or plays or take any time off, because Philadelphia fans certainly love an Eagle that has heart and desire, and it seems like he's got a lot of that.
Yeah, Schwartz was talking about the time he was the head coach in Detroit, and he told the training staff and he told his coaches, he said, let's give Stephen a veteran day and just give him a day off of practice. And he didn't think much of it, because that's what you do with veteran players around this league. It's what Doug Peterson talked about earlier when training camp started, talking about players like Jason Peters, and it's what Chip Kelly didn't believe in. But it's normal protocol for most of the NFL. But Stephen Tulloch came into Jim's office and he said, "What are you doing?" And he explained to him he's never missed a practice dating back to high school, through college at North Carolina State, and up to the pros at that point. This is obviously before his 2014 ACL injury. And Jim described him as mad as a hornet. And he says he doesn't compromise. And anybody who knows Jim Schwartz can believe that. This is a guy not big on compromise. But Stephen Tulloch won that argument. He lessened his repetitions, but he was on the practice field, and he just has a ton of respect for players who want to be out there with their teammates, even though they've earned sort of those special privileges, and that's one of the reasons he has so much respect for Stephen Tulloch.
And you talked about Michael Kendricks a minute ago. Where do you think Jordan Hicks plays best of the three linebacker positions? What position do you like him at the best?
Well, I like him, and I've always thought he's a natural weak side linebacker, and that's obviously where Michael's playing right now. He's just not big enough. If you see Stephen Tulloch, and if you go to my Twitter account, I took a quick picture of him as he went onto the field for his first Eagles practice. He just looks like a middle linebacker. He's a little short, as Jim joked. He's 5'11", but he's 245 pounds, and he's built for the trash you see as a middle linebacker, where you're going to have a ton of blockers, and you have to shed them. And Jordan's more of an athletic guy who doesn't have that pure strength. And to me, he needs to be off the ball and be able to run and make plays. I think that's his natural position. And I think that's where he's going to end up anyway down the line, so you might as well get to it as quickly as possible.
Wearing Trotter's old number, it looks like, too, 54?
Yeah, he is wearing 54, and, you know, at some point, because of the NFL's numbering system, you have to have replicants, but it does make a lot of sense if you think about what Jeremiah was as a middle linebacker here. And that's what Stephen Tulloch is. He's a traditional 4-3, old-school Mike linebacker in the NFL. And as I said to Mike many times before he got here, I said when he did get here, the minute he steps on the field, he'll be the Eagles' best run defender. And as long as he is capable of doing it physically, that will hold up to be true.
John McMullen's with us at JF McMullen on Twitter, by the way, if you want to see that picture of Tulloch in his Eagles green. And, of course, John writes for 97.3 ESPN.com. His article right now states Schwartz gushes over Tulloch, which kind of indicates, hey, they Schwartz liked this guy. And yesterday, Michael Rothstein, that covers the Lions for ESPN.com's NFL Nation, John, told us if Jim Schwartz wants him to start, he's playing. Does Schwartz have a lot of influence on this Eagles team?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I mean, he's the defensive coordinator with an offensive head coach, so he's in charge on that side of the football as far as what goes on. And I think Michael's correct in the fact that if he wants him to start, he's going to start. Nobody's going to interfere with that. Where it comes into play where he's not in charge is getting him in here. As I said, I think if Jim was in charge of that, he would have been here 2 weeks ago, probably, a lot earlier. But obviously when it comes to cobbling together this roster, Howie Roseman has final say, and then Doug obviously has a big impact as the head coach, and then comes Jim. And they wanted to see what Joe Walker could do, and he was performing very well in everybody's eyes, including Jim Schwartz, by the way, as a rookie 7th-round pick. So I think if he doesn't tear his ACL, I'm not sure Jim would have gotten the player he wanted because he's not in charge of bringing guys in. But now that he's in and he's a defensive player, Jim's in complete control, and that's one of the reasons I think he's going to be the starting middle linebacker on this team.
How much do you think his head coaching experience Peterson leans on? I mean, it seems like Peterson, I don't want to say delegates, but he certainly doesn't seem like Chip seemed like he was hands-on everything. That he was basically the be-all, end-all for almost everything. It seems like Peterson is a lot less in the spotlight here and feels comfortable letting Schwartz do his thing and, DeFilippo go work with the quarterbacks. It seems like Peterson is a lot less micromanager.
Well, I don't think his ego is as big, and I think anybody in the NFL, if you're a head coach, you're essentially CEO, and I think that's what, if Chip wants to be successful long-term, I think he has to learn from what went wrong here, and one of the things he needs to learn is you have to trust other people to do their jobs, because you can't do everything by yourself, and One of my main criticisms of Chip was that he wore too many hats. There's not enough hours in the day to be the general manager and the head coach and the play caller and controlling things on the sideline as far as time management. Think about how difficult that is when you got 40 seconds between plays. It's just not possible. And that ended up being Chip's demise. So I think from that standpoint, hey, if you're a smart head coach, you're smart enough to delegate. And if you have a good defensive coordinator, and he's got one of the best, why wouldn't you delegate? You're an offensive guy. So I don't take that as a criticism of Doug Peterson at all. It's just he hired a really good coach, and he's going to let him do his job.
John, is this a playoff-level defense?
I think the starters are, or at least could be, in a bad division. There's a lot of caveats on that. But there's not much depth, and there wasn't much depth even before they bring in a Stephen Tulloch. If any of the starters get injured, especially at safety, when you're talking about Malcolm and Rodney McLeod, who are two really good players, but then it falls down to Jalen Watkins and Chris Maragos. If you look at Fletcher Cox and Benny Logan up front, that's really, really good. But then it falls off to guys like Mike Martin, who's been injured. He's finally back at practice, and Taylor Hart and Bo Allen. So there's not a lot of depth on this team, basically anywhere on the defensive side of the ball. So I think the starters could be a really good defense, and probably will be because Jim is that good. But if the injury bug starts to take effect on this team, we're going to have to revisit that statement, because there's not going to be any defensive coaches that could have success with some of the players they would have to throw out there.
Is Jim Schwartz so good that maybe you liken him to like a relationship that Jim Johnson had with Andy Reid during the Reid era? The way that relationship is with Peterson?
People have made that comparison. Yeah, I think it's a good comparison. I really do. Because obviously Jim Johnson was tremendous, and Jim Schwartz is, all you have to do is look at his defense in Buffalo. It was top 5. He was there for 1 year, and then Rex Ryan comes in, who's got a reputation as a pretty good defensive line and defensive mind, and it falls off a table. And you saw some of the success his teams had in Detroit defensively, going all the way back to Tennessee, and some of the players he's had and turned into very, very rich men, especially on the defensive line. He's well regarded. You cannot find anybody in this league, and believe me, I've looked, who will criticize Jim Schwartz as a defensive coordinator. Don't criticize him as a head coach, because he had some issues. But as a defensive coordinator, he's as well respected as it gets.
Talking with John McMullen from 97.3 ESPN.com. Read his piece on Stephen Tulloch in his first day at practice and what kind of impact he could have on this team at 97.3 ESPN.com. Pete asked if this is a playoff-level defense. You know, I think a lot of people think this defense could be pretty good if they stay healthy. On the offensive side of the ball, though, the wide receiver group, which has been talked a lot about, is this a serious boom or bust group, or do you just say, no, this group is just what they are, not very good? Or do they have the potential to prove us all wrong?
I think one guy's got the potential to prove us all wrong, and that's Dorial Green-Beckham, who's got the kind of physical ability to just turn it on and become a star in this league. Everybody else, though, I don't think so. I think we know what they are and understand what they're going to be. Jordan Matthews is a competent NFL player. He's a good player, but he is what he is. He's a number 2 receiver in this league. And everybody else, it's just a mismatch of underachievers, starting with Nelson Aguilar and Josh Huff. I continually say from the offseason, Nelson has to play better than he did in his rookie season because he can't play worse. But I just don't see the upside. I haven't seen it He doesn't play with a lot of confidence. He's not a physical receiver. He has trouble getting all press coverage all the time. He doesn't scare people with his deep speed. Even though he's got good quickness in and out of cuts, that would be his strength. But I just don't see him developing into an upper-level receiver in this league, and Josh Huff has gotten enough opportunities. We know what he is, and at this point, he's the kick returner, not much more. And I think Ruben Randall has some upside, but you've seen some of the criticisms they had in New York about him, and the fact that he just doesn't give it 100% every day, and that tends to wear on the coaching staff and his teammates. And I'm not even sure if he makes the final 53 at this point now that DGB is here.
How about Paul Turner, John? Gil and I have gone back and forth about whether or not he makes the team. First and foremost, does Paul Turner make this football team?
Well, I think of this group, if they don't make changes, I think he does as the last receiver. I still think it's more likely they go outside the organization to add another body, and he ends up on the practice squad more than 53. Because remember, even after they traded for Green-Beckham, they tried to pick up Rasheed Bailey on waivers, and that tells you two things. They're not happy with their current wide receiver group, and they're not done just because they traded for DGB. So I think when you get that cut from 75 down to 53, there's going to be a lot of receivers on the street, and some of them are going to be more talented than what they have here. So I think it's a possibility they still add another body to that group.
And then if there's that many questions, John, at the receiver position, then how important of an emphasis does that put on the tight end position? How many tight ends do they keep, and how important does that position become?
Well, it's very important because it's probably their strongest position on offense. And you have three constants in Zach Ertz, Brent Selleck, and even Trey Burton, who's had a tremendous training camp and off season. So those three guys are definite. Earlier in camp, Doug basically decreed that Chris Pantale was going to be the fourth tight end and make this team. He's kind of slipped back, though. He hasn't played as well since they started putting the pads on. So they might have to revisit that. But I could certainly see them keeping four, and three are going to be very significant to what they do on offense, basically each and every week.
He's John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com's very own Eagles insider, and you can check out his work at JF McMullen on Twitter or on the website 97.3 ESPN.com. John, we're halfway through the preseason. They'll play Saturday night right here on 97.3 to kind of get that big third game. And Sam Bradford admitted, yeah, we want to do well in the offense. Frank Reich said we're going to actually game plan a little bit more, something they don't normally do. But what I want to ask you is, where we are halfway through, entering the third game, is there a surprise cut and a surprise keep on your mind?
Well, I think the biggest surprise keep, at least until the last couple of days when people have kind of figured it out, would be Paul Turner. If not that, it's Stephen Means on the defensive side of the ball at defensive end. Remember, he was a 3-4 outside linebacker, and under Chip Kelly, they moved him to defensive end like they've done with a lot of guys, Connor Barwin, Brandon Graham, Brian Bremen. And he's played really, really well every time he's gotten an opportunity. And to be honest, he's outplayed Marcus Smith, who hasn't played badly himself, but had the issue with the concussion, just recently got back after being cleared. So I could see Stephen Means making this team, and I think that would surprise a lot of people. And the surprise cuts, it would start probably at the wide receivers, and either Randall or Givens. And then if you're talking about the defensive side of the ball, there's such a lack of depth. Maybe your biggest surprise is a Taylor Hart, because really there's no depth on that side of the football, so you're not going to see any big names get cut.
All right, Don, we got obviously the game on Saturday night. We'll see a little bit more of the offense, that defense as well. What are we going to get, a half?
Yeah, they should play into the third quarter. So you like to get the guys and sort of replicate what you do in a real game. So you want them to go into the locker room at halftime and come out and play a little bit after intermission, so they get used to doing it on game day. So probably a little bit into the third quarter, and then they'll shut everybody down. The meaningful for the preseason finale against the Jets, that'll be all the young players, and then we finally get going for real.
Yeah, we do, against Cleveland Browns right here on 97.3 ESPN. By the way, John, I got to ask you, I don't know, I can't believe I didn't do this yesterday. Maybe I did and I just forgot. Did Brock Lesnar maliciously attack Randy Orton and bust his head open on purpose, or was that an accident?
He did not do it on purpose. He was cleared to do it. However, when you're trying to do something hard way, and that's an inside wrestling term, you can tell to the people, sometimes it doesn't work out as you plan, and the 10-inch gash was not supposed to be that big.
10 staples to his head he needed. That's unbelievable. But it seemed like once he cracked his head open, he took pleasure in, now I just get to pound away because this is all part of the show.
Well, that part I think is correct. He does take pleasure in that.
John,
keep up that peaches and herbs stuff, John. I enjoyed that in your article. Good stuff.
Only people. I'm dating myself on that, but I had to use.
He's John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter. Go to 973ESPN.com. Get all his Eagles preseason practice notes, game day notes, and all every day at 973ESPN.com and right here every day at 4:05 on the Sports Bash. Thank you, pal.
Hey, thanks, guys.
And John will be a part of the show for all 4 hours during football season every Tuesday.
Wonderful.